Lives, Chapter 20. That week unfolded slowly with hot days and muggy, breathless nights. Militia units from the surrounding colonies piled into the city. Ordinary folks skedaddled out of it as fast as their horse or feet could carry them. The extra soldiers were not the cleanest sort, or maybe they were too busy drilling and making gunpowder cartridges to wash. Whatever the cause, New York soon smelled like a garbage pit mixed with the fresh mountain of manure. The stench cooked under the midsummer sun. Madame's moods changed with the tide. One moment she was floated on the clouds of fancy, imagining a grand life once the British beat the rebels. Next, she fell into melancholy, grumbling about the lazy British commanders floating at the anchor of Staten Island, observing New York through long spyglasses, but making no move to invade. She carried with her a brocade pouch suspended from the red satin cord. Within the pouch lay a green flask with a calming elixir prescribed by the doctor. He advised her to drink from it whenever the need arose. She also took to walking around the house in her stocking feet, trying to catch me unaware as I scrubbed or dusted or polished, often with Ruth at my side. She said nothing during these encounters, but watched us with hungry hawk eyes, and it unnerved me. Then, a week after Hickey's hanging, Becky suffered a mild attack of the ague that had befallen to many soldiers. She grew pale and sweaty, but did not require purging or leeches. In her stead, I went to the market. Our needs were fewer now, but that we had to no longer feed the master and his companions. It was a good thing, for the farmers were afraid to come into the city, and there was less to choose from. More people fled every day, including the wives of General Washington, Colonel Knox, and Brigadier Greene. Her that folks said that was such a big flirt. I searched for Curzon every day, but Bellingham's affairs kept him out of sight. I was afraid to seek out Colonel Regan, and afraid that if word get back to Madame, our lives would be put in jeopardy. 10 days after the British flooded the river with their ships, news that the Congress had declared independence arrived in New York. The declaration was read to the troops in the front of City Hall. The men cheered so loud it seemed to shake the whole island. I hurried from the egg cellar to see the cause of the commotion. The cheering men danced and marched down Broadway, tossing their hats into the air and shouting across the river at the silent ships of England. They gathered into a mob on the Bowling Green around a massive statue of King George III. I stayed at the edge of the crowd, hoping for a glimpse of Curzon or a soldier familiar with my visit from the battery. The king was mounted on his horse, and the horse mounted on a white marble pedestal that rose to the height of 3 men standing atop one another. Both the horse and the man were fashioned large than could be possible, but I suppose that's the way it was of kings. They were both made of gold that sometimes glittered in the sun, but dulled when the clouds interfered. Ropes appeared as if conjured, thick ropes used for tying ships to the docks. The men cheered louder and worked together to throw the ropes over the king and his horse and tied them tightly. 1, 2, 3, heave! 1, 2, 3, heave! The men strained their arms and backs. Boys on the edge of the crowd jumped up and down. Common folks stood froze at the sight of a king being pulled down by the strength of the men working together. 1, 2, 3, heave! The statue toppled, slowly at first, then gaining speed as the weight fell from the sky to the ground, and the men scrambled out of the way, no one wishing to be crushed by a fallen king. As it crashed, they shouted even louder and swarmed over the thing. Axes were called for and rushed out of the workshops, up from the barracks. A half-dozen men took to chopping the king and his steed to bits. I inched closer. How could they be chopping through a statue with simple axes? A piece of tail broke off, and a soldier held it up for all to see. The king was not made of gold, but of soft lead covered with a gilt paint. The crowd shouted again, and another soldier lifted the king's head, freshly removed from his neck. A fife of drums cord started playing just beyond the mob, piping out a song usually heard by the tar and feathered party. The men made short work of King George. When the statue was reduced to pieces that could easily be carted off, they did just that. The plan was to melt down all the lead into bullets. "We'll fire Your Majesty at the redcoats," joked the man with a booming voice. "Aye," said his companion, shouldering an axe. "Emanations of leaden George will make deep impressions on the enemy." The crowd marched off to make bullets and celebrate liberty and independence in the taverns. I realized dark was falling fast, and I had tarried too long. I picked up a sliver of lead that lay in the street. It was fringed with gilt, my own piece of the majesty. Tyrants beware, I thought, as I put it in my pocket. I was surprised to see the front parlor windows alight when I walked down Wall Street. "Is a master back?" I asked Becky. She was dozing in the chair by the kitchen fire with a red check shawl around her shoulders, still worn down from her illness. Becky yawned and stretched. "Far from it. Madam paid a call to the Reverend's wife after supper, and came home with high color in her cheeks and a bee in her bonnet, dressed the child, she says. Make sure both of the girls eat something nourishing and sweet." "Did she fall and hit her head?" I asked, setting down the basket of eggs. Becky laughed. "I think Mrs. Reverend served her a dose of scripture, the hard kind," Madam said. "Madam says I've been too harsh on my servants. I must mend the ways of the Lord, or the Lord will punish me." I was confuddled. She's being kind to Ruth again? Becky slowly winced from the aching in her bones. Surely so. Ruth lit up like a lantern when she saw them fancy clothes again. She promised to be as quiet as ever, made short work of the gingerbread Madam baked too. This was too much. I sat down at the table. Madam baked? She's a fair hand in the kitchen when she puts her mind to it. Left the dishes for yours truly, but the cake was tasty. Those 2 pieces are for you. She was most firm about it. I stopped to cough up what sounded like a large wet worm from her throat. "She cooked up sweet milk for you, too, with nutmeg, cinnamon, and sugar. Said she wants you to have some with your gingerbread." I sniffed the pitcher. It smelled good enough. "Did you have any?" "Not with this cough. Milk would stop up my lungs." I looked around the kitchen. "Where's Ruth now?" Becky unpinned her apron and folded it, and then tied her bonnet, preparing to go home. Madam got it in her head to play cards this eve. Has 2 companions with her, the Mrs. Drinkwater and her daughter, the one who's to marry some sort of lord or duke or some such. Ruth is with them. She was right cheered after the cake and milk. Should I take anything in? I just came from there. Madam was most definite. Tell Sal to enjoy her cake and a night off. She has worked hard these weeks and could use a good night's sleep. She called me Sal instead of girl, I asked. "And are you for certain, or full certain she didn't hit her head today?" Becky laughed, and I laughed. And the laugh caught in her throat and bubbled into a cough. Look here, she's likely to return into a sour old cow by breakfast. So I say, have a good sit down and enjoy a little peace. I poured the mug of milk. Huzzah for the Reverend's wife. I wanted to savor the gingerbread bite by bite and sip the milk slowly, but I couldn't help myself. The mug was drained and the plate empty. Soon after Becky left. The milk was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. The spices so thick I could nearly chew them. No wonder Ruth was cheered by it. I washed up my dishes, tidied the kitchen, and found myself with idle hands. A rare event indeed. I might could sneak into the library and borrow the Crusoe book. I could read by the fire with the mending basket nearby to slip in the book if Madam approached. That seemed like a fine plan, but first I wanted to shed my bodice. It pinched something awful under my arms. I felt my way down to the cellar with my toes and heard the sound of laughter from Madam's company. I yawned. When would they leave? What sort of ladies came to call this late? I removed my bodice and hung it on the nail. The pallet looked soothing and cool. The thought of climbing up the stairs again made me weary, but I would like to read a few more pages. But I was overly fatigued. But Mr. Crusoe was facing all sorts of dangers, but in betwixt one thought and the next, I fell asleep. And for that, I shall never forgive myself.